interest loophole remains the same. And I am proud of the support that we have been building for this tax reform. Now, since the beginning, the Patriotic Millionaires have been standing with us because they understand the importance of bringing fairness to our tax code. And I'm happy to be joined by its chair, Morris Pearl, again today. I don't know, is Randy here? Well, I'm going to recognize the Take on Wall Street group. They have also helped us grow awareness and make progress in this fight. And if she is able to make it, we will ask Randi Weingarten to represent them in some remarks here today. For far too long, our tax code has been rigged by powerful interests to benefit millionaires, billionaires, and hedge fund managers on Wall Street. As a result, we have an economy that rewards those at the top, while the incomes of ordinary Americans have flatlined, and our working class struggles to get ahead. In other words, our tax code and our economy rewards wealth over work. As middle-class families live paycheck to paycheck, hedge fund managers on Wall Street continue to get tax breaks, and that is not fair. The carried interest loophole allows Wall Street millionaires and hedge fund managers to pay a lower tax rate than many truck drivers, teachers, and nurses. That is wrong, and it needs to change. While campaigning, President Trump made a promise. He made a promise to working Americans, saying that he would eliminate this loophole. On the campaign trail, he said hedge fund managers are getting away with murder, and that carried interest loophole was, quote, unfair to American workers. In fact, when President Trump was asked about this loophole on Face the Nation this weekend, he said, quote, it's gone. If he is in fact serious about closing the carried interest loophole for hedge funds on Wall Street, we are introducing the legislation to do just that, and we would welcome his support. But we're going to hold him accountable to stand by the promises he made. The problem is President Trump is already breaking his promise on closing this loophole. Last week, two former Wall Street bankers offered a one-page outline of the Trump administration's tax proposal. Did he include closing the carried interest loophole in this one-page tax proposal? No. However, did it include massive tax cuts for millionaires, billionaires, and lower tax rates for hedge fund managers on Wall Street? Yes, it did. No wonder that this has sparked headlines that said, quote, first bumps at hedge funds over Trump's tax plan. President Trump is engaged in a classic Washington game of bait and switch, and the hedge funders on Wall Street, they love it. The president says he will close the carried interest tax loophole, but what he is really proposing is a lower tax rate for hedge fund managers than they already have today, and that's shocking. Instead of taking on a rigged system, he is making a rigged system better even for them and worse for everyone else. President Trump should stand up to the corporate lobbyists, the big banks, and the Wall Street insiders who are calling the shots and playing him as their puppet. He should simply throw out this one-page proposal and stand by his word to close the carried interest loophole with the support of our legislation. Let's put an end to rewarding the wealthy with tax preferences, and let's start working together on tax reform that invests in an economy that works for everyone, not just the wealthy few. And now I'd like to turn it over to my good friend, Congressman Sander Levin of Michigan.
Well, I'm glad to be here with Morris, with Randy, and especially with you, Tammy. I'm going to have to leave after I make my remarks to meet with Democrats on Ways and Means who are working on tax reform, and that's only appropriate because this carried interest issue really reflects what tax reform should be all about. We've been working on this for 10 years. And essentially, what has happened is that there's been a boondoggle, and people are using capital gains instead of ordinary income in order to escape taxes. That's what they've been doing for years, paying a lower rate, calling what was ordinary income a capital gain. Well, now what's happening in this tax plan, as you said, the president is talking about having pass-throughs at 15%. So you may have the interesting phenomenon of people who have been using carried interest flip-flopping. And instead of their calling it capital gain, if it's a higher rate, they're going to call it ordinary income. And that highlights the problem with this Trump tax plan one page. It essentially helps the very wealthy and some corporations. And so people who have been exploiting carried interest may decide, oh, all of a sudden, I am a different entity, and I will now pay 15% instead of the capital gain. And so what we're saying to the president is he promised to get rid of the carried interest loophole. He didn't even mention it in his plan. But now what he's doing is saying the boondoggle for carried interest hasn't been enough. Now essentially we're going to let everybody who is a pass-through pay 15% and dramatically tilt the tax code even more to the very wealthy. And so that's really the significance of our meeting today. This flip-flop is only an effort to provide a bigger tax cut for the very wealthy. His tax plan is totally out of kilter. They talk about a middle-class tax cut. It is dwarfed by what is being proposed here with the 15% and the lower, higher rates. And so we're here today. Mr. President, keep your promise to get rid of the carried interest loophole and don't make it worse by having a bigger loophole for all the wealthy people and corporations in the United States. So in that sense, this press conference is even more significant because he's made a promise, and if he doesn't carry it through, it will only be because he thinks ending that loophole isn't enough. We have to make sure that very wealthy people, hedge fund operators and the like, have a still lower tax rate than they've been paying now. So now I'll turn it over to the two of you. And I think all of us are so glad we have been working on this tax inequity issue, because carried interest highlights what's been wrong with this tax code, and this plan of the president would make it all very worse. And we're here to say we're going to fight it to the end. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Congressman Levin. Thank you, Senator Baldwin. I'm Morris Pearl. I'm here on behalf of the Patriotic Millionaires to deliver a message specifically to President Donald J. Trump. President Trump, over and over and over and over again on the campaign trail. You promised your voters if they voted for you and you were elected, that you would close the carried interest loophole. Over and over and over and over again, you promised you would stop this obscene giveaway to a few rich people on Wall Street. You called the loophole the darling of Wall Street. You said the hedge fund guys are going to have to pay up. You said the hedge fund guys were getting away with murder. What a difference an election makes. First, you packed your cabinet and the West Wing of the White House with people from Wall Street like Steve Schwarzman, who compared closing the carried interest loophole to Hitler's invasion of Poland. Then you released your tax plan. This tax plan, in addition to being a wholesale giveaway of money to the very rich, says absolutely nothing, zero, nada, nothing at all about the carried interest loophole. When several fact-based publications, including the failing New York Times, point out this egregious omission, you sent your surrogates into overdrive to insist you're still planning to keep your promise. Mr. Trump, do you see any mention of carried interest in this plan? I do not. So the question that we have for you is very simple. Do you plan to keep the promise you made to your voters to close the carried interest loophole or not? If you do plan to close it, we'll work with you to get lawmakers from both parties on this bill, the Carried Interest Fairness Act, which is exactly what you claimed you wanted to do. To be clear, there are 0 Republican sponsors on this bill this day. But if you do not plan to close this loophole, we'll spend the next 4 years making sure the voters know that you refuse to keep your promise that you made to them, despite overwhelming support for the Democrats in the House and the Senate for closing the loophole that you yourself campaigned on so aggressively. You claimed during the campaign that you could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and your voters would not care. We will see if they likewise forgive you for continuing to let hedge fund managers get away with murder. Your move, Mr. President.
So, how do you follow all of that? So, you know, I'm really honored to be here with Senator Baldwin, Representative Levin, and with my dear friend Morris. And let me take this from the perspective of, I don't know, a school teacher or a sanitation worker who has been told by the president while he was campaigning, and I quote, "We will eliminate the carried interest deduction." Another quote, "The hedge fund guys didn't build this country. These are guys that shift paper around and they get lucky. The hedge fund guys are getting away with murder." And another quote, "The hedge fund guys won't like me as much as they like me right now. I know them all, but they'll pay more. They'll pay more. I know people that are making a tremendous amount of money and paying virtually no tax, and I think it's unfair." And last quote, "We're going to reduce taxes for the middle class, but for the hedge fund guys, they're going to be paying up." Those are all quotes that the president said as he was running as a populist, trying to reach those hard-working folks in Michigan and Wisconsin, all across the country. What we see in his first 100 days, particularly with the tax plan, is he ran as a populist, and he's governing as an elitist for the gazillionaires. And that is exactly what this tax plan says. So, first and foremost, it's not so hard, even in a one-pager, to say, I am eliminating carried interest. He knows it. The folks who work around him know it. It's not so hard to say, I am eliminating this. This is part of what I am eliminating. He eliminated the state and local tax deduction, which is really, really important for people around the country in terms of what really funds education and healthcare. Not so hard to do. As Morris said, nowhere in the first plan. Number two, the pass-throughs are actually even more of a boon. So if you think about it, as the teacher who is paying an ordinary income, which hedge funds are actually making and have a loophole called carried interest, so they pay 20% instead of 39%. the teachers under this tax plan don't get any change. They're still paying ordinary income taxes. Maybe they get a little bit more of a standard deduction, but they're still paying that. But the people who get the boon are the people who used to pay 20% instead of 39%, and now they're going to pay 15%. So the people who get the boon are actually having their taxes reduced, not increased. So we're just saying to the president, look, we teachers, sanitation workers, we may not know these words, carried interest, pass through. They may not be the words we know because they're not part of our tax returns. But ultimately, you can see what's going on here. Mr. President, don't break your promises. Do what you said you were going to do on the campaign trail. Eliminate the carried interest loophole. Have the hedge funders pay the same kind of taxes in the same kind of way as the teachers of this country. Don't give them more of a tax break. Be the populist you said you were. Thank you.
Thanks. Any questions? Going once, twice. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Senator. Great to be with you again.
Good to be with you again.
Thank you.
We'll do something in Wisconsin.
Yes.
Thank you.
It's been a long time.
Thank you. You too.